Fog rolled low across the moon of Parin 9. It moved slow like smoke that refused to rise. Under that fog, 12 Vor'kesh soldiers lay flat in the mud, weapons ready, eyes fixed on a human supply road below. Their leader was called Skarn. He was old for a scout, and old scouts survived because they were careful. Tonight he was not careful. Tonight he was excited. For 3 months, Skarn's unit had watched a human squad the Vor'kesh called Ghost Company. That name was not a joke. Ghost Company moved without sound. They struck without warning. 3 Vor'kesh patrols had died to them, and not one enemy body was ever found in return. High Command believed Ghost Company was something rare, something built different from other humans, an elite unit. A weapon disguised as a squad. Skarn had studied their patterns for weeks. Tonight, his instruments picked up a human convoy on this exact road at this exact hour. It matched everything he knew about Ghost Company's movements. "This is them," Skarn whispered to his second, a young soldier named Vex. "Tonight we kill the ghosts." Vex did not look excited. Vex looked afraid. But Vex was young, and young soldiers do not argue with old ones. Down on the road, headlights broke through the fog. Not fast, not sneaking. Just an ordinary convoy rolling forward like it had nowhere urgent to be. 3 trucks. No heavy weapons visible. No special markings. Skarn smiled under his mask. Ghost Company always looked ordinary. That was the trick. That was why nobody ever saw them coming. "Wait for the signal," Skarn said. Then everything at once. The trucks rolled closer. 12 rifles rose slowly from the fog, aimed and steady. Skarn counted the seconds in his head. 3, 2, 1, now. The night lit up with gunfire. For half a second, it looked like a perfect ambush. The first truck's tires burst. The second swerved hard. Vor'kesh rounds tore through metal and glass. Then something went wrong. The humans did not scream. They did not freeze. Before the echo of the first shot even faded, doors were already open and bodies were already moving, not running away, but running toward cover, low and fast like they had rehearsed this 100 times before.
"Because they had contact left, 4 hostiles,"
a human voice shouted, calm as if reading off a shopping list. Skarn's confidence cracked. This was too smooth, too practiced. This had to be them. This had to be Ghost Company. Return fire snapped through the fog, sharp and precise. Vex went down first, a clean hit through the shoulder plate. He didn't even get to yell. 1 second he was aiming, the next he was on the ground, and a Vor'kesh soldier beside him crumpled next. "Fall back to the ridge." Skarn barked, but the words came too late. The humans were not just defending the convoy. They were hunting the ambush. 2 of them broke off from the trucks entirely and moved uphill through the fog, flanking wide, using the terrain like they had walked this exact ground 100 times in daylight, in the rain, in the dark. A Vor'kesh soldier on the left flank fired blind into the fog and was answered by 3 shots, all close together, all on target. He didn't get back up. Skarn's mind raced. This was supposed to be a clean kill. 12 against a convoy escort of maybe 6. Instead, in under a minute, half his team was already down and the humans hadn't lost a single person that he could see. "Ghost Company," he said under his breath, almost like a prayer. It was the only explanation that made sense. Nothing else fought like this. He was wrong. But he would not live long enough to learn how wrong. A shape moved through the fog to his right. Fast, low, quiet, despite the chaos. Skarn turned and fired, but the human was already past his barrel, already inside his guard. A hand gripped his weapon and shoved it aside. Skarn saw the human's face for half a second. Young, tired, unremarkable. Just a soldier. Just a person doing a job. Then everything went dark. When the fighting stopped, the fog was still rolling, slow and quiet, like nothing had happened at all. Of the 12 Vor'kesh soldiers who came to kill Ghost Company, only 1 remained alive, barely. He lay in the mud, his suit leaking air, his vision fading at the edges. Above him, a human soldier crouched down. Not Ghost Company. Just a driver. Just a mechanic with a rifle, pulled from convoy duty because the schedule needed 1 more body for the route tonight. The Vor'kesh soldier's comm still worked. With the last of his strength, he opened a channel back to the fleet. His voice was a broken whisper, but the message was clear enough to record. This was not the elite unit, he said. This was not Ghost Company. This was a supply escort. "Ordinary soldiers, And they fought exactly the same. The channel crackled. Far above the fog aboard a Vor'kesh warship, an officer heard those words and felt something cold settle in his chest. A feeling he did not yet have a name for. Down on the ground, the wounded soldier's vision went black. His final words stayed on record. Repeating once, twice, 3 times through the static, "They are all like this." Every single one, somewhere above the clouds. The Vor'kesh fleet had no idea that one dying scout had just discovered the single most important truth about humanity. A truth the Council was not ready to hear, and would refuse to believe until it cost them everything. Far above Parin 9, in a chamber built from black metal and cold light, the Vor'kesh Council gathered to hear the report from the fog-covered moon. 12 soldiers sent, 11 dead. One dying message repeated 3 times. "They are all like this." The Council did not sound worried. They sounded annoyed. One scout team panicking in the field, said Counselor Rand, the oldest voice in the room. "This proves nothing. Soldiers say strange things when they are dying." General Doran, commander of the Eastern Fleets, was not so quick to dismiss it. He was a career soldier, not a politician, and he had learned long ago that dying men rarely lied. 11 trained scouts, killed by a supply convoy in under 2 minutes. That is not panic, Counselor. That is a pattern. Ron waved a clawed hand. A pattern of bad luck. Nothing more. To understand why the Council reacted this way, one must understand what they believed about humanity. A belief built over years. Repeated in every briefing room. Taught to every new officer before their first mission. Long ago, when the Vor'kesh first studied human military records, they noticed something strange. Most human soldiers fought like any other species, brave but ordinary, predictable, beatable with enough numbers and patience. But a small number of human units fought differently. These units left no survivors among their enemies, left almost no trace of themselves behind, and seemed to win battles that should have been impossible. The Vor'kesh gave these rare units a name: Special Forces. And from that name, an entire strategy was built. Every alien species allied with the Vor'kesh Council learned the same lesson, over and over, in every briefing. Avoid Special Forces. Engage the common army freely. 2 tiers. One dangerous, one safe. Simple, clean, easy to plan around. General Doran had used this exact rule for 15 years. It had never failed him, until tonight. "Show me the supply convoy's roster," Doran said. A junior officer pulled the file onto the display. 6 humans, a convoy driver, 2 engineers, a supply clerk, 2 general infantry, pulled from routine escort duty because the schedule was short that week. No special training listed, no elite unit designation, nothing that should have made them dangerous. And yet, Doran studied the combat footage recovered from Skarn's helmet camera, grainy through the fog but clear enough. He watched the humans move, the way they called out threats calmly, the way they flanked without hesitation, the way none of them froze even when their own people were hit. He had seen this exact behavior before, only once, 2 years ago, in a battle against a unit his intelligence officers had confirmed, without doubt, as human special forces. The tactics were identical. "This should not be possible," Doran said quietly. Counselor Ron sighed, the sound of someone tired of a conversation he considered beneath him. "General, you are letting one bad report shake 15 years of confirmed intelligence. We have fought thousands of human soldiers. Most of them died easily. A handful did not. That handful earned the name Special Forces. This," he gestured at the footage, "is one unlucky exception. Or," Doran said, "it is the first time we accidentally tested a supply convoy the same way we test Special Forces, and it passed." The room went quiet for a moment. Then Ron laughed, short and dismissive. "You are overthinking a scout team's bad night, General. I have a war to plan, and it does not pause for one confusing report." He turned to the display and called up a new file, a human border colony named Ashfall Reach, marked on Vor'kesh maps as a low-priority target. Intelligence listed its garrison as Common Army, Standard Defense. No special forces detected in the region for months. An easy target, safe one. "We move forward with the Ashfall Reach invasion as planned," Ron announced to the Council. Full Legion deployment. Minimal resistance expected. This will remind our allies that the Vor'kesh do not hesitate over ghost stories. Doran wanted to argue further, but rank was rank, and the vote was already forming around the table. One by one, the council raised their hands in approval. The invasion of Ashfall Reach was authorized. Doran remained silent, but as the meeting ended and the council rose to leave, he stayed behind, staring at the paused footage of Skarn's final battle. He rewound it once more, watching the human driver, an untrained mechanic pulled onto convoy duty for one night, move through the fog with the calm precision of a soldier who had done this 1,000 times before. They are all like this, the dying scout had said. Doran did not believe in ghost stories, but he did not believe in coincidence either. He opened a private channel and sent a short message to his own intelligence division, separate from the council's official record. Pull every human engagement report from the last 5 years. I want to know how many common army units fought like special forces. I want real numbers, not assumptions. He closed the channel and looked back at the frozen image on the screen, a supply convoy that should have died easily, standing instead over the bodies of trained scouts. Somewhere below, on a fog-covered moon, the story of Ashfall Reach had not yet begun. The council believed it would be simple. Doran was no longer sure of anything. Across human space, the survivors of that small skirmish went back to their normal lives without ever knowing what they had started. The convoy driver filed a routine incident report and returned to hauling supplies the next morning, unaware that a council light years away was arguing over whether he counted as ordinary or extraordinary. He was, in truth, neither. He was simply what every human soldier had quietly become, trained the same way, held to the same standard, shaped by the same long and brutal history the Vor'kesh had never fully understood. The council believed they were about to fight a common army. They had no idea there was no such thing left to fight. Ashfall Reach was a quiet place before the war came to it. Wide fields, a handful of small towns, a border garrison that mostly dealt with smugglers and bad weather. Nobody there expected an invasion. The last real threat assessment had called it low risk. That assessment was about to be proven very, very wrong. Commander Thalgor stood on the bridge of the lead Vor'kesh cruiser as it broke through the atmosphere, watching Ashfall Reach grow larger on the display. He had led legions into a dozen worlds before. This one on paper should have been the easiest yet. Common army garrison, no special forces detected, minimal fortifications. High Command expected the colony to fall within 2 days. Thalgor did not fully trust easy anymore. Not since he had read Doran's private report, the one the council had quietly ignored. Numbers didn't lie, and Doran's numbers were troubling. Dozens of common army engagements over the last 5 years, each one ending with casualty ratios that matched known special forces encounters almost exactly. Thalgor had brought extra reserves just in case. His officers had mocked him for it. The first landing craft touched down in the outer fields as the sun rose over Ashfall Reach. 50 Vor'kesh soldiers moved out in standard formation, rifles ready, expecting scattered resistance and quick surrender. That was how common army engagements usually went. Warning shots, a brief exchange, a white flag by midday. Instead, the first shot came from nowhere anyone could see, and it did not miss. A Vor'kesh soldier on point dropped instantly, and the formation scattered on pure instinct before any order was given. What should have been a slow, disorganized human retreat instead became something else entirely. Human defenders falling back through the fields in tight, practiced groups covering each other in turns, never leaving a gap for the Vor'kesh to push through. Command, we are taking heavy resistance, the field officer reported, his voice already tight with confusion. This does not match the garrison profile. Thalgor watched the feed from orbit, jaw tightening. The garrison profile said light infantry. Poorly equipped, minimal training. What he was watching instead looked like a controlled, coordinated defense. Soldiers using the terrain like they had trained on this exact ground for years. Because as it turned out, many of them had by midday, 3 full companies had landed. By evening, the invasion had not advanced past the outer fields. Thalgor took a shuttle down himself, unwilling to trust the report secondhand. What he found on the ground unsettled him more than any battle he had commanded before. Human trenches dug in perfect defensive patterns, crossfire zones planned with mathematical precision. Wounded soldiers being pulled back under fire by comrades who did not hesitate, did not panic, did not break formation even as their friends bled beside them. He crouched beside a fallen Vor'kesh soldier and asked the nearest surviving officer for a status report. They fight like ghosts. "Commander," the officer said, voice shaking. "Every squad. Not just one. All of them." Thalgor had heard that phrase before. They are all like this. Doran's warning, dismissed by the council, now playing out exactly as feared in front of his own eyes. That night, under the cover of darkness, Thalgor ordered a full artillery barrage on the human forward line, hoping to break their defense through sheer force where infantry had failed. The barrage lit up the sky for 20 minutes straight, flattening trenches, cratering fields, turning the quiet farmland of Ashfall Reach into something closer to a battlefield from nightmares. When the smoke cleared, Thalgor expected silence. He got return fire instead. The human line had fallen back exactly 100 meters, a planned withdrawal, not a collapse, and had already dug new positions before the barrage even finished. They had anticipated the attack. They had prepared for it, not because they were some secret elite unit, but because this was simply how they were trained to fight, all of them. Every soldier, every rank, every posting. 2 days later, the invasion that was supposed to take 48 hours had cost Thalgor nearly a third of his landing force, and Ashfall Reach had not fallen. Worse, reports from 2 other fronts, invasions the council had also called low risk, were now describing the exact same pattern. Coordinated defense, no panic, no breaking point, casualty numbers far beyond anything predicted for common army resistance. Thalgor requested emergency reinforcements through official channels. The request was denied. Round's office responded with a short, dismissive message. Adjust tactics. Do not request additional resources for a colony marked low priority. Standing in a command tent at the edge of a battlefield that refused to behave the way it was supposed to, Thalgor read that message twice, then set it aside and opened a private channel instead, the same kind Doran had used weeks earlier. "Something is wrong with our intelligence," Thalgor said into the recorder, keeping his voice level despite the exhaustion pulling at him. "We do not understand what we are fighting. We call it a 2-tier system, special forces and common army. I no longer believe the gap exists. I believe we invented a difference that was never real, and it is costing us dearly for every day we refuse to admit it." He sent the message directly to Doran's private line, bypassing the council entirely. Outside the tent, the sounds of distant gunfire continued through the night, steady, controlled, disciplined. Not the chaos of a desperate garrison making a last stand, but the calm rhythm of soldiers who simply knew what they were doing, because that was the only way they had ever been trained to fight. Thalgor stepped outside and looked toward the human lines, barely visible in the dark. Somewhere out there, ordinary engineers, mechanics, and infantry, soldiers with no special title, no elite designation, were holding a line that should have collapsed on the first day. He thought again of the dying scout's final words, still echoing through fleet channels weeks after Parin 9. They are all like this. Every single one, for the first time since taking command. Thalgor found himself hoping the report from that dying man had been wrong. Every hour that passed on Ashfall Reach proved, more and more, that it had not been. Doran received Thalgor's message in the middle of the night, alone in his private office aboard the fleet command station. He read it twice, then a third time, before finally setting it down and staring at the wall for a long moment. "I no longer believe that gap exists." 2 commanders now, from 2 different fronts, saying the same thing in different words. Doran was not a man who believed in coincidence, and he was no longer able to convince himself this was one. He called for Lyra Voss before dawn. Lyra was young for an intelligence officer, but sharp in a way that made older officers uncomfortable. She did not accept easy answers, and she did not fear questioning data that everyone else treated as settled fact. Doran had chosen her for exactly that reason. "I need everything we have on human military training," Doran said, sliding a data slate across his desk. "Not the summary reports, not the briefings we give new officers. I want the raw records, historical files. Anything buried?" Lyra frowned at the request. "Sir, that information has been reviewed 100 times. The conclusion has never changed. 2 tiers, special forces and everyone else. Then review it again, Doran said, because 2 commanders on 2 different fronts are telling me that conclusion is wrong, and men are dying because we built a war plan on it. Lyra took the assignment seriously enough to lock herself away for 3 full days, buried in old files that hadn't been opened in years. What she found did not fit neatly into any report the Council had ever approved. The Vor'kesh classification system had been built decades earlier, based on a small number of early encounters with human forces. In those early battles, a few human units had performed at a level far above everything else observed at the time. Vor'kesh analysts working with limited data concluded there must be 2 separate categories of human soldier, an elite class and a common class beneath it. That conclusion was written into doctrine, taught in academies, and never seriously challenged again. But Lyra found something the original analysts had missed, buried deep in older, dismissed human historical archives, records the Vor'kesh had access to but never fully studied, because they seemed irrelevant to modern warfare. Human military training, across nearly every nation and era on their homeworld, had followed one consistent principle for centuries. Baseline standards did not bend. A supply clerk and a frontline soldier came from the same basic training pipeline. A mechanic pulled onto guard duty had still passed through the same combat fundamentals as any infantry unit. The line between support and combat roles was administrative, not physical. Everyone learned to fight the same way, to the same standard, before they were ever assigned a specialty. There was no second tier. There was only one very high bar, applied to everyone without exception. What the Vor'kesh had labeled special forces were not a separate class of soldier. They were simply human units given more time, more resources, and more specialized missions, built from the exact same foundation as every other unit, not something fundamentally different from it. Lyra sat back from her desk, staring at the conclusion she had just written, feeling the full weight of it settle in. Every common army engagement the Vor'kesh had planned around, every strategy built on the idea that regular human forces were a safer, easier target, all of it rested on a mistake made decades ago and never corrected. She brought her findings to Doran personally, refusing to send something this significant through any recorded channel. "There is no gap. Sir," she said, placing the file on his desk, "we built one because of a handful of early battles that scared us. But the difference we assumed existed was never really there. Every human soldier is trained to what we call an elite standard. It is not elite to them. It is simply normal." Doran read through her report slowly, line by line, his expression darkening with each page. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. 15 years, he said quietly. 15 years of doctrine, built on a mistake we never bothered to check twice. "There's more, sir," Lyra added. "If this is true, if there really is no meaningful gap, then every casualty estimate we've ever used for low-risk engagements has been wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong." Doran thought of Parin 9, of Ashfall Reach, of Thalgor's message, sent through private channels because official ones had already failed him. "Draft this into a formal report," Doran said. "Full findings, full evidence, no simplified summary. I want the Council to see exactly what you showed me, with nothing softened." Lyra hesitated. "Sir, with respect." The Council did not want to hear this from a dying scout, and they did not want to hear it from General Thalgor. "What makes you think they will listen to an intelligence officer's report?" Doran did not have a comforting answer for her. "They may not," he admitted. "But if we go into more of these invasions believing in a gap that doesn't exist, this war will cost us more than anyone in that chamber is prepared to accept. Someone has to put the truth in front of them, even if they choose not to look at it." Lyra spent the rest of that night finalizing the report, cross-referencing every data point twice, making sure there was no soft place for the Council to push back on. By the time she finished, the sun was rising over the fleet station, and somewhere on Ashfall Reach another day of fighting was already beginning, following the exact pattern the Council refused to believe was real. Doran read the final report once more before sending it forward, pausing on Lyra's closing line, the one she had insisted on keeping despite his suggestion to soften it for the Council's taste. "We did not find an elite among ordinary soldiers. We found that ordinary to humanity was never what we believed it to be. He sent the report to the full council that morning, fully aware of how it would likely be received. He was right to be uneasy. Within hours, the answer came back, and it was not the one either of them had hoped for. The council chamber was colder than usual the morning Doran's report arrived. Or perhaps it only felt that way to him as he stood waiting for a response that took far too long to come. Councillor Ron read the file first, his expression unreadable. Then he passed it down the table, one councillor after another, each reaction ranging from concern to open irritation. When the file finally returned to the center of the table, Ron looked up at Doran with the same tired patience he had shown weeks earlier, on the night of Skarn's death. "This is a well-written report," Ron said. "I will give your officer credit for thoroughness. But you are asking this council to rewrite 15 years of doctrine based on old historical records and 2 frustrated field commanders. I am asking this council to look at evidence," Doran said, keeping his voice level. Parin 9 Ashfall Reach. 2 other fronts reporting the same pattern this week alone. The data does not stop being true because it is inconvenient. "Convenience has nothing to do with it," snapped Councillor Earl, a younger member known for aligning closely with Ron on most votes. "Do you understand what you're suggesting? That every classification, every strategy, every resource allocation this council has approved for over a decade was built on a false assumption? That is not a small correction, General. That is an admission of catastrophic failure." "Then let it be an admission," Doran said. "Better that than more dead scouts and stalled invasions." Ron leaned back, folding his hands. "General, I understand you are shaken by Ashfall Reach, but consider the alternative you are proposing. If we accept this report, we tell every allied species that our intelligence has been fundamentally wrong about our primary rival for 15 years. Our authority, our credibility as leaders of this coalition, all of it becomes questionable overnight. We are not simply choosing between 2 tactical theories, General. We are choosing whether this council survives the humiliation of admitting such an error." There it was, finally spoken plainly. Not strategy, not evidence. Pride. Doran looked around the table, searching for even one face that seemed willing to push back. He found none. Fear of humiliation had settled over the chamber like fog over Parin 9, and no one seemed willing to be the first to walk through it. "Ashfall Reach will fall," Ron continued, turning back to the main display. "We simply need to commit fully instead of hesitating. General Thalgor requested reinforcements, denied previously due to priority concerns. I am authorizing them now. Full second-wave deployment. We will overwhelm the colony through numbers, prove this was a temporary setback, and close this matter permanently." Doran felt something cold settle in his chest. "Counselor, more soldiers will not fix a plan built on a false premise. If there is no gap between Common Army and Special Forces, then sending twice as many soldiers into the same mistake simply means twice as many casualties. Or," Ron said, "it means we win decisively and put this uncomfortable theory to rest for good. I would rather trust 15 years of doctrine and a numerical advantage than the private opinion of 2 field commanders and 1 enthusiastic young analyst." The vote followed quickly, and just as quickly it passed. Full reinforcement deployment to Ashfall Reach, authorized within the hour. Doran left the chamber with Lyra's report still in hand, its conclusions ignored, its warning treated as an inconvenience rather than a lifeline. He returned to his office and opened a direct line to Thalgor, delivering the news himself rather than let it arrive as a cold, impersonal order. On Ashfall Reach, Thalgor received the message in a command tent surrounded by exhausted officers and mounting casualty reports. Reinforcements were coming. Twice the previous force ordered to break the human defense through sheer weight of numbers. He read the order twice, then looked out toward the human lines in the distance, quiet under a gray morning sky. The second wave landed 3 days later. Thalgor watched from a forward position as fresh troops pushed forward across open fields, confident in their numbers, expecting the extra weight to finally crack a defense that refused to break. It did not go as planned. The humans adjusted just as calmly as they had from the very first day, falling back in controlled stages, drawing the larger Vor'kesh force deeper into prepared kill zones, trading ground for time and time for casualties. There was no panic in their lines, even as the attacking force doubled then tripled the size they had faced before. If anything, the human defense seemed to grow more disciplined under greater pressure, not less. Thalgor watched one exchange in particular that stayed with him long after the battle ended. A wounded human soldier, clearly no more than a support engineer based on his equipment, dragging a fallen comrade back under heavy fire without a moment's hesitation, covering him with return shots the entire way, calm and precise despite being hit himself. No elite training, no special unit designation. Just a person doing exactly what he had been taught to do since the earliest days of his service. Because that was simply the standard, and the standard did not change based on who was watching. By the end of that day, the second wave had gained perhaps 200 meters of ground, at a cost far higher than the Council's projections had allowed for. Thalgor stood amid the aftermath, surrounded by wreckage and the sounds of medics working through the wounded, and felt the last of his patience with the Council's denial finally break. He sent one final message, addressed directly to Doran, refusing this time to soften a single word for anyone above him. "There is no weak tier," Thalgor wrote. "There never was. We built an entire strategy on a ghost story we told ourselves because the truth was too uncomfortable to accept. We are not fighting an army with elite exceptions. We are fighting a species that made excellence the baseline and called it ordinary. I do not know how many more soldiers this council is willing to spend proving what 2 dead scouts and a colony full of wounded already told us for free." Doran read the message alone in his office. Late into the night, the weight of it settling over him like the fog that had once covered Parin 9. He did not send it to the council. He already knew how they would receive it. Instead, he simply saved it, alongside Lyra's report and Skarn's final dying words, building a record that history would eventually have to answer for, whether the council was ready to hear it now or forced to hear it later, after the cost had grown far too large to ignore. The casualty reports from Ashfall Reach kept arriving long after the second wave should have secured the colony. Doran read them each morning before dawn alone in his office, watching numbers climb that no one in the council chamber wanted to acknowledge out loud. By the 10th day of the reinforced invasion, Ashfall Reach had still not fallen. Worse, 3 other low-risk fronts across human space were now reporting the same pattern. Controlled defenses, disciplined casualties, no panic, no collapse. What had once looked like an isolated anomaly on a fog-covered moon now looked like the truth about an entire species, playing out on battlefield after battlefield, exactly as Lyra's report had warned. Doran was not the one who finally forced the issue. That task fell unexpectedly to the numbers themselves. A full accounting of losses across every active front was presented to the council that week. Not by Doran, not by Lyra, but by the council's own logistics division, whose only concern was resources, not pride. Ships lost, soldiers lost, equipment spent far beyond any projection built on the old 2-tier doctrine. The report did not use the word mistake. It did not need to. The numbers said it plainly enough on their own. Ron sat at the head of the table as the figures were read aloud, his expression unreadable at first, then slowly, visibly, shifting into something closer to alarm than he had allowed himself to show in any of the previous meetings. "These losses are not sustainable," the logistics officer said flatly. "Not for one front, not for 4. If this pattern continues across the wider war, we are looking at a resource collapse within 2 years, regardless of whether we ultimately win or lose individual engagements." Silence settled over the chamber, heavier than it had been on any of Doran's previous visits. It was Councillor Earl, the same officer who had once accused Doran of asking the council to admit catastrophic failure, who finally spoke the words no one else wanted to say first. "We need to see the report again," Earl said quietly. "The one from the young analyst, Lyra Voss." Doran, seated at the edge of the chamber where he had not expected to speak at all that day, felt something shift in the room for the first time since Skarn's death weeks earlier. Lyra's report was brought back to the table, the same file that had been dismissed without real debate the first time. This time, no one interrupted as it was read in full. This time, the historical training records, the dismantled assumptions, the quiet, uncomfortable conclusion at its center. There was never a real gap. Only one standard applied to everyone, were allowed to sit in the room without being talked over. When it finished, Ron was silent for a long moment, staring at the display showing casualty projections that no longer matched anything the council had planned around. 15 years. he finally said, echoing Doran's own words from their earlier private conversation. 15 years of doctrine, and we built our entire strategic understanding of humanity on a handful of early battles we never properly re-examined. No one in the chamber argued the point this time. There was nothing left to argue against. The evidence had grown too large, too costly, too consistent across too many fronts to dismiss as bad luck or panicked reporting anymore. What do you recommend? Rahan asked, turning to Doran directly for the first time in the entire conflict. Doran did not hesitate. He had been ready for this question far longer than the council had been ready to ask it. Full reclassification, he said. Immediately. Every human military designation, regardless of unit type or assignment, treated as top-tier threat capability. No more distinction between common army and special forces because that distinction was never real to begin with. Every engagement plan, every resource allocation, every casualty projection rebuilt from that single assumption going forward. That will slow every current operation significantly, Irel warned. Commanders across every front will need entirely new engagement protocols. They will, Doran agreed. But they will also stop losing soldiers to a mistake we have already paid for a dozen times over. I would rather move slower and survive than move fast toward the same failure again. The vote, when it finally came, was not unanimous, but it did not need to be. It passed, and with it came the order Doran had been waiting weeks to hear. Full reclassification of all human military forces, distributed immediately to every Allied fleet, every field commander, every intelligence division across the coalition. On Ashfall Reach, Thalgor received the new directive standing in the same command tent where he had first begun to doubt everything the council had ever taught him about the enemy. He read the order twice, then looked out once more toward the human lines, still holding after weeks of fighting that should have ended long before now. For the first time since the invasion began, he ordered a full withdrawal, not a retreat born of defeat, but a decision made with clear eyes, built on a truth finally accepted instead of denied. There was no honor in throwing more soldiers at a species whose baseline had been mistaken for an exception for far too long. Word of the reclassification spread slowly across the wider war, reaching officers and analysts and field commanders who had spent years operating under the old two-tier assumption. Some resisted the change, clinging to doctrine that had defined their entire careers. Most, especially those who had fought on the ground themselves, accepted it with a quiet, unsurprised nod, confirmation of something they had already begun to suspect, whether the council admitted it or not. Lyra Voss received a formal commendation for her report, though she found little satisfaction in it. She thought instead of the dying scout on Parin 9, whose final words had started this entire chain of discovery, and of how long it had taken for a truth spoken with someone's last breath to finally reach the people who needed to hear it. Doran, for his part, kept a private copy of every report that had led to this moment. Skarn's final transmission, Thalgor's private messages, Lyra's original findings, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that assumptions once written into doctrine could calcify into truth that no one thought to question again, until the cost of that silence became impossible to ignore. Far below, on the fog-covered moon where this had all begun, the wreckage of Skarn's ambush had long since been cleared away. No monument marked the spot. No official record beyond a single dying transmission remained to explain what had happened there. But across 100 fronts, in briefing rooms and command tents throughout the coalition, one phrase had quietly become doctrine, replacing 15 years of false comfort with a simple, unavoidable truth. There is no weak tier. There never was. The Council had spent years fearing humanity's special forces, certain that danger lived only in a rare elite few. What they finally understood, far too late and at far too great a cost, was that they had never truly been facing an exception at all. They had been facing a baseline the entire time, and it had never once been anything less than extraordinary.